The story of Richard Dimitri isn't just about the roles he played. It's about the choices he made when fame was finally within reach, and the quiet life he built after stepping away. Because behind the laughs, the sitcoms, and the Broadway lights, there's a moment most people never talk about. The day he turned down a chance to sing at one of the most prestigious opera houses in the world. And that decision changed everything. Richard Dimitri's final years were spent far from red carpets and studio lots. According to publicly available information, he passed away at the age of 83, surrounded by his wife, Christian, after a long health journey involving heart and lung conditions. But instead of focusing on the loss itself, it's the way he lived, especially after leaving Hollywood, that makes his story so powerful. Because Richard didn't fade away. He reinvented himself. Richard Dimitri was born in Yonkers, New York, in 1942. His early life wasn't glamorous. His father left when Richard was still very young, and he was raised by his mother and grandfather. That kind of upbringing shapes you. It teaches you resilience, independence. And maybe that's where his quiet determination came from. After finishing high school, Richard followed his passion straight into the arts. He enrolled at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and graduated in 1962. Just 1 year later, he made his off-Broadway debut in a revival of The Immoralist. That role opened doors. Soon after, he found himself stepping onto Broadway stages, performing in productions like Zorba, The Guide, and Lysistrata. For a young actor from Yonkers, this was the dream. But Richard wasn't just an actor, he was also a teacher. In the early 1970s, he spent 2 years teaching acting at Queens College in New York. And that tells you something about him. He didn't just want to perform, he wanted to pass the craft on. Still, something bigger was coming, and it would pull him all the way to Los Angeles. In 1975, Richard landed what would become one of his most memorable roles, playing twins Bertram and Ronaldo in Mel Brooks' comedy series When Things Were Rotten. 2 characters, 1 actor. Comedy like that isn't easy, but Richard made it look effortless. The show was a parody of Robin Hood, and while it only lasted 13 episodes, it gained a cult following. And for Richard, it meant a permanent move to LA. This was his break. From there, Hollywood opened up. He appeared in films like Johnny Dangerously, starring Michael Keaton, where he played Roman Moroni, a nightclub owner known for hilarious word mix-ups. He later showed up in Let It Ride as Johnny Cheeseburger, acting alongside Richard Dreyfuss, and he even worked with Gene Wilder in The World's Greatest Lover. At this point, Richard was everywhere. TV shows, films, comedy clubs. He performed stand-up at the Comedy Store, guest starred on shows like Starsky and Hutch, Hawaii Five-0, Welcome Back, Kotter, and The Tracy Ullman Show. His career was stable, respected, growing. And then something unexpected happened. According to his obituary, Richard had an operatic tenor voice. Good enough, in fact, that he was offered the chance to audition for the Vienna State Opera, one of the most prestigious opera houses in the world. For many performers, that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a dream, a career reset at the highest level. But Richard said no. He chose to stay in acting. No headlines, no big announcement, just a quiet decision. Think about that for a second. How many people would walk away from something that big? What did he see in his current path that made him stay? Maybe he loved storytelling more than spotlight. Maybe he didn't want to start over. Or maybe he just knew who he was. In the 1990s, Richard stepped into another side of entertainment, writing. In 1993, he co-created the Fox sitcom Daddy Dearest, starring Richard Lewis and Don Rickles. Working with legends like that? That's not luck, that's respect. He also wrote for CBS House Calls and NBC's Going Bananas. By now, Richard wasn't just in front of the camera. He was shaping stories behind it. But behind the scenes, something else was happening: his health. In 1998, Richard made a decision that surprised many. He retired from the entertainment industry, not because he lost passion, but because of serious, chronic health conditions. Imagine spending your whole life building a career and then choosing to walk away. That takes strength. And this is where his story takes a turn most people never hear about. After leaving Hollywood, Richard didn't disappear. He started over, this time in the art world. Together with his wife, Christian, he opened an art and antiques gallery in West Hollywood. It wasn't just a hobby. It became a real business. He even sold an 18th century masterpiece to the Getty Museum. From sitcoms to fine art, that's not a downgrade, that's evolution. And during all of this, his personal life mattered more than anything else. His obituary describes him not just as a performer, but as a devoted husband and father. Someone who created warmth and security around his family. And this is where the story becomes even more emotional. In 2017, Richard and Christian experienced a heartbreaking loss. Their son, John, passed away at just 19 years old due to a rare congenital heart condition. Public sources confirm that the family later created a foundation in his honor to support research for congenital heart disease. Instead of turning away from pain, they turned it into purpose. That tells you everything about who Richard was. In his final years, Richard lived quietly. No interviews, no comeback to, no dramatic announcements, just life, with his wife, with his memories, with the legacy he built. According to public statements, he passed away peacefully with Christian by his side. No spectacle, no drama, just love. And here's the part people don't talk about enough. Richard Dimitri didn't chase fame until the end. He chose meaning. He chose family. He chose reinvention. And in a world obsessed with spotlight, that might be his greatest role of all. When news of Richard Dimitri's passing became public, reactions didn't explode across trending pages, and that, in a way, felt fitting, because Richard was never about noise. He was about substance. Several colleagues and fans shared quiet tributes online, remembering him not for headlines but for moments. People recalled his kindness on set, his sharp sense of humor between takes, the way he made even background actors feel noticed. One former co-star reportedly described him as the kind of actor who never stole the spotlight, but somehow always owned the scene. That's rare, especially in comedy. Writers who had worked with him on Daddy Dearest spoke about how collaborative he was. No ego, no power games, just ideas on a table and respect in the room. And that's something you don't forget. Although When Things Were Rotten only ran for one season, it aged better than anyone expected. Over the years, the show developed a cult following. Clips started resurfacing online. New generations discovered Mel Brooks' humor and Richard's twin performance. Playing two characters in the same show isn't just acting. It's timing, voice control, physical comedy. Richard made Bertram and Ronaldo feel like two completely different people. Different energy, different rhythms, different presence. Some fans online even admitted they didn't realize it was the same actor until years later. That's talent, not flashy, not loud, just precise. Here's a question people keep asking. Why didn't Richard Dimitri become a megastar? He had the talent, the resume, the connections, but fame doesn't follow logic. Sometimes it follows controversy. Sometimes it follows scandal. Sometimes it follows noise. Richard never chased any of that. He worked. He showed up. He delivered. And then he went home. No feuds, no viral moments, no public drama. In today's world, that almost feels revolutionary. When Richard retired in 1998, some thought it was temporary. A break, a pause, but it wasn't. It was final. And according to publicly available information, the decision came from serious health challenges. Now think about this. At a time when many actors fight to stay relevant, Richard chose peace. He chose health. He chose a life that didn't depend on applause. That says more than any award ever could. His second career as an art and antiques dealer wasn't random. Richard had taste, an eye for detail, history. He and Christian opened their gallery in West Hollywood and quickly earned respect in that space too. Collectors trusted him. Museums worked with him. One of his biggest achievements? Selling an 18th century masterpiece to the Getty Museum. That's not luck, that's credibility. Imagine going from sitcom scripts to fine art transactions. Different world. Same discipline. Richard and Christian were married for 26 years, but they weren't a red carpet couple. No flashy interviews, no public branding, just life. And in his final moments, she was there. Not cameras, not reporters. Her. That detail alone tells you everything about what mattered most to him. The loss of his son, John, in 2017 changed everything. John was born with a rare congenital heart condition, and according to public records, his passing led the family to create a foundation in his honor. Instead of silence, they created support. Instead of hiding, they helped others. This wasn't about attention, it was about impact. And that may be the most powerful part of Richard's legacy. Richard Dimitri's life isn't a Hollywood fairy tale. It's better. It's real. He chased his dream. He achieved it. He walked away when he needed. And then he built something new. Most people are afraid to start over. He did it twice, acting, writing. Here's something that stands out. Richard never seemed to want more than what he had. He wasn't desperate for fame. He wasn't chasing validation. He didn't need to prove anything. And in a world that constantly demands more, that's rare strength. Maybe that's why his story resonates so deeply. Not because of how famous he was, but because of how grounded he stayed. Since his passing, more people have started revisiting his work. Clips from Johnny Dangerously, scenes from Let It Ride, moments from When Things Were Rotten. And for many, it's like discovering a hidden gem. Comments like, "I can't believe I never noticed him before. He stole every scene. This guy was underrated." And maybe he was, but maybe he didn't mind. Richard Dimitri didn't leave behind scandals. He left behind work, stories, characters, and people who remember him fondly. That's a clean legacy. And in entertainment, that's priceless. There's a quiet detail in Richard Dimitri's story that most articles mention only in passing, but it might be the most revealing part of his entire life. The opera audition, the Vienna State Opera, one of the most respected institutions in the world. He had the voice, he had the invitation, he had the door wide open, and he still chose not to go. Think about what that really means. This wasn't fear. This wasn't lack of confidence. This wasn't rejection. This was a conscious decision. Richard knew he could walk into another world, a world of classical prestige, international recognition, and a completely different career path. But he stayed. Not because it was easier, but because it was right for him. That tells you something most resumes never show. He wasn't chasing the biggest stage. He was choosing the right one. Hollywood teaches people to never quit. More roles, more exposure, more relevance. Richard did the opposite. When his health became a real concern, he listened. He stepped away while he still had dignity, while he still had control, while he could still choose his life. That's rare. Most people don't leave. They fade. Richard walked. And that's power. People who worked with Richard didn't describe him as famous. They described him as reliable, prepared, funny between takes, respectful to crew. One assistant director reportedly said he was the kind of actor who thanked everyone even people whose names never appear in credits. That tells you character, not the kind you play, the kind you live. Comedy isn't about being loud, it's about timing. Richard understood silence, pauses, subtle facial expressions. That's why his characters felt real, not cartoonish. Even in absurd roles, he grounded them. And that's a skill you can't teach. After losing his son John, the family helped create a foundation dedicated to congenital heart disease research. And this matters, because Richard didn't just leave behind films. He left behind impact. Something that continues, something that helps others. That's bigger than applause. Richard Dimitri represents something rare. A successful career without obsession, without ego, without noise. He didn't burn bridges. He didn't chase trends. He didn't reinvent himself for attention. He reinvented himself for life. And that's the difference. In an era of viral fame and constant visibility, Richard's story feels almost rebellious. He proved you don't need millions of followers, public drama, constant exposure to have a meaningful life. He built a career, then a second one, then a family, then a legacy. Quietly, we celebrate box office numbers, awards, headlines, but we don't celebrate peace, fulfillment, privacy, choice. Richard chose all of those. And maybe that's why his story hits harder than most. Richard Dimitri didn't die famous. He lived fulfilled, and those are not the same thing. So when we look back at his life, the real story isn't about one show, one role, or one moment. It's about a man who knew when to chase a dream and when to let it go. And maybe that's the question his story leaves us with. How many of us are brave enough to walk away from something good to build something better? In the next video, we'll dive deeper into the forgotten careers of actors who chose peace over spotlight and what happened to them after the cameras stopped rolling.